Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to House Tax Committee. We will call the meeting officially to order. First item of business, as always, will be requests for bill introductions.
Is it on? Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me. Members of the committee, Michael Ruffin representing AT&T, requesting bill introduction for RS 0140, and this is an act concerning taxation relating to the sales and compensating use tax, providing for a sales tax exemption for sales of property and services using the provision of communication services, basically a sales tax exemption on communications purchase equipment to expand broadband networks.
Thank you for that. Committee, are there any questions? Any objections? Oh, Representative Corbett.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you loud and clear. Representative
Sounds
Cooper.
like a good bill.
Appreciate it.
Any objections? Seeing none, the request is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Are there further requests for bill introductions? Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few bills here I want to have read in and get started finally that have been percolating for a while. The first one is RS 0092, which is relating to the revenue neutral rate bill. And it's having been victimized by a county clerk, or I hate to say victimized, but having been affected by a county clerk that did not do things pursuant to the original bill. This is to provide another access for how to deal with revenue neutral rate for taxing entities. Second bill is RS 0032, which involves taking the income taxes currently in the state from 3 tiers to 2 tiers and reducing them in the process over 2 years. The third bill is RS 0039, which involves eminent domain and how folks are paying state capital gains tax on property that's taken from them when they have no desire to sell that property. And that's basically the theme of that. The fourth bill is RS 0030, which is we've already heard a bill on this already, which is I call the Social Security cliff. It's a different way to pattern and look at it going forward, raising it from 75K to 100K and then having a gradual integration above 100 to 120K. And the final bill is RS 0090, which involves, I've had 2 constituents reach out to me about totaled vehicles, that when you replace that vehicle, that you would be allowed a sales tax difference in the new vehicle, that you would not have to pay sales tax twice in a year. And that's the shortened version of those bills. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those bills. I know that's a lot. This has been percolating these have been building up for a long time, so.
Thank you, Representative Epley. Questions, Representative Clayton.
Thank you. I apologize. I was, attending to personal needs and so missed. Could you repeat those introductions for me just one more time for my edification? Thank you.
Are you serious?
Okay, maybe just the one about the 3 tiers to 2 tiers of what I just caught the end of that. So
I'm going to get some tiers here, but I'm happy to give you the number. Yes. So the reducing from 3 tiers, current system or status quo, to 2 tiers is RS 0032. And it would take the income tax rate over 2 years down to 5% for the higher earners and from 3.1 to 2.9% over 2 years for the lower income earners.
okay, thank you.
Does that help? Anything else you need repeated, Representative Clayton? Okay.
Committee, any further questions on any of the Epley bills? Any objection?
I just want, for sake of clarification, I did not consult with Tim Hodge before I came to committee today. So
duly noted. Seeing no objection, the requests are approved. Representative Wassinger for a bill introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to introduce 23 RS 0165. It's a tax bill relating to income privilege and premium tax credits, establishing a tax credit for contributions to eligible charitable organizations operating pregnancy centers or residential maternity facilities.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Any objections? Seeing none, the request is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any further requests for bill introductions? Any from the gallery? Seeing none, we will close that item of business and move on to our, actually, I want to make a quick announcement before we move on to the next agenda item. Leah, did we get out the confidentiality agreements? Okay. Committee, you should have received a confidentiality agreement to sign for the tour at the Department of Revenue next week. Please get those signed, filled out, and remitted back to Leah so you can participate in that tour. Please do that by tomorrow if possible, or Monday. Okay, we will move on now to our presentation, and we'd like to welcome Matt Etzel with the Legislative Division of Post Audit for a cryptocurrency audit report. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matt Etzel. I'll be presenting the findings from this is a limited scope audit that we did, which means that it's contained to about 100 hours. So it's much smaller than our full performance audits. But it had just a single question in this audit, and that was to determine how Kansas's cryptocurrency tax policies compare to federal policies or best practices. The short answer to that is that Kansas's tax policies did generally align with federal policies, but some of those policies have been difficult to enforce in recent years. So just a little bit of background, cryptocurrency is, of course, a digital representation of value that is kept virtually in a fairly complex form of encryption called blockchain. Crypto can be used for a variety of things. You can use it to purchase goods, services from individuals. Some private retailers have even started to accept cryptocurrency as a form of formal payment. And you can also use it as a form of speculative trading or investment, much like you would stocks or bonds. In any case, what we found is that the IRS basically says all cryptocurrency transactions need to be taxed, which will bring us into kind of our main findings in this audit report, which, if you happen to have it in front of you, would start about halfway down on page 4. Basically, what we found was at the federal level, the IRS taxes cryptocurrency as property. So, for example, let's say somebody accepts cryptocurrency in exchange for a $40,000 vehicle. That person would be required to determine the fair market value in US dollars of that cryptocurrency that they received for that vehicle. Then that person would need to report that value as part of their federal adjusted gross income. In another example, I mentioned people can could sell or trade cryptocurrencies similar that they would to other stocks. In those cases, the IRS says any gains from those transactions are subject to capital gains tax and would also need to be reported on taxpayers' income tax, either through their AGI or their FTI. So really at the federal level, cryptocurrency is taxed really as part of someone's annual income taxes. When we looked at how Kansas taxes cryptocurrency, what we found was that basically it reflects federal policy. And that's because, as I'm sure you're aware, Kansas's income tax code does mirror federal tax code. So basically Kansas uses that federal AGI or FTI as the starting point for the state's income taxes. So as long as it's been reported to the feds, Kansas should also be receiving tax revenue from cryptocurrency transactions. The problem with that is that it's been difficult for the IRS to enforce those tax policies. Basically, they've been having a hard time verifying whether somebody should have reported crypto income on their taxes. And that's likely led to a lot of underreported income when it comes to these transactions. What we found was that recently there's been a lack of third-party reporting when it comes to cryptocurrency, especially for those large cryptocurrency trades. So for example, people can use a private crypto exchange or broker to sell or trade their cryptocurrency just like you would use a stockbroker. But unlike traditional stocks, there hasn't been traditionally there hasn't been a mechanism that requires those brokers, those exchanges, to notify the IRS about those transactions. Because of that, it's been hard for the IRS to track cases where somebody should have reported capital gains but didn't. So up until this point, it's been a little bit of an honor system when it's come to reporting on cryptocurrency transactions, especially some of those larger ticket broker exchanges. Because of that, people probably aren't reporting all of their gains on their federal AGI or FTI. And again, because Kansas uses these as a starting point for the state's income tax, Kansas probably is missing out on some of that revenue as well. Now, the federal government has been aware of this and did pass a bill in 2021 that should help strengthen some of their third-party reporting. Basically, it would have gone into effect January 1st of this year. Cryptocurrency exchanges will now be required to report customer information and transactions to the IRS for any of those broker exchange transactions that I mentioned earlier. That should help them identify cases where somebody should have reported capital gains on their income tax and didn't, basically help give them a little bit more information to help audit some of these cases. That being said, that still really only applies to those crypto exchanges. Individual transactions would obviously still be very difficult to track, which of course is part of the design of cryptocurrency in general, is that it is complex and difficult to track. It's kept on it's recorded on a distributed ledger, which kind of decreases some of the transparency in this. So there's a little bit more, it seems like, controls in place as of this year to try to create a little bit more transparency in some of those, at least the big ticket items, the big transactions when it comes to cryptocurrency. But it seems like there's still a little ways to go in terms of developing a mechanism to really identify all of these cases or most of these cases to determine what should be taxed. And then, of course, that would have a trickle-down effect into Kansas's taxes as well. The only specific tax policy that we saw related to Kansas that wasn't associated with federal policy, the Department of Revenue did come out with an official notice a few years ago that basically said if a store in Kansas chooses to accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment for point of sale transactions and those sort of things, the business is still responsible for determining the sales tax on that item that was sold and remitting that in US dollars to the state. So basically, the state would not accept cryptocurrency as a form of sales tax. It would have to be remitted in US dollars. That was the only policy that we found that was specific to Kansas. That's a pretty high-level overview of our audit. I'd be happy to stand for any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I wanted to go back to the 21 bill, the federal bill that you referenced. Is that on like a 1099, or how does that get reported? And did I hear you correctly earlier to where that simply flows through? There wouldn't be any mirrored legislation that the state would need to do in response to that federal bill?
That's correct. I want to say, and I can double check this for you. I want to say it was if this sounds right, a 1044B, if that is what the feds would require those brokers fill out. But no, there wouldn't be any action required on the state. And from as far as I can tell, that did start to go into effect as of January 1 this year.
Do you know of any other anticipated legislation, or is that kind of where they're wanting to start out and see where it goes, looking at the exchanges? And then is there any attempt to, I'm not sure how, because it really depends on self-compliance, how you capture any of that information outside of the exchange?
Yeah, and this audit, and with the speed at which cryptocurrency moves, this audit is only 6 months old, and I'm sure there's been some updates that have happened already in the last 6 months and what the feds are thinking. At the time of this audit, I can say the reason why those exchanges and those brokers were targeted first was because they felt like, again, that's where a lot of those big dollar trades are happening. And they felt like they could probably get the most bang for their buck by requiring those exchanges to provide that information to the IRS, and then start to look at kind of more individual, smaller cases below that. But I'm not aware of any new legislation that's come out in the last 6 months or proposed in the last 6 months.
Committee, any further questions? Not even from our chair of financial institutions. Okay. Okay. If there are no further, Representative Wassinger.
So I was listening and I was typing, trying to make sure I had a handle on this. So up until this year, we really haven't, the federal government and the state government really hasn't done much to require people to report anything. And if now we're telling people they have to, how are they going to implement that? I suppose that's a question for revenue over there. Sorry. But they've all gotten away with it for so long. So why suddenly is this going to work? Just thank you, Mr. Chair.
I do think part of that was seeing how the federal government was going to treat cryptocurrency transactions. So I think at some point there's a definition that came out to say, look, basically the IRS is going to tax this because it's not considered legal tender at the state level, or I believe at the federal level either. So I think part of that is trying to navigate how do you actually tax this, and that the feds came out and the IRS came out and said, look, we're really going to trade that. We're going to treat this as a trade of property. So we're going to tax cryptocurrency as we would property. But then I think that definition came out, and then I think some time was spent going, but how do we enforce that? Right? It's very difficult to see how and where and when these transactions take place. So how do we start to target that? How do we start to enforce that is the idea. And I think one of the more visible parts of this whole process are those private exchanges, those companies that are helping folks trade and sell and buy their cryptocurrency in large volumes. So I think that's why that was kind of targeted to go after at the federal level. I don't think right now, I mean, as if that were to work, I can't speak to whether or not that's working or how well that's going to work. But if that were to work, the feds would start, in theory, collecting more tax revenue from those trades, which would then roll into the state's income revenue as well annually. But I think will remain to see how effective that policy is.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, I have Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions for you. I guess number one, are you aware of any businesses that currently collect crypto in Kansas as form of payment?
I'm not aware. The names that we saw were kind of larger box stores nationally. I don't know if any of them in Kansas specifically are.
Okay. And then second, I guess with the devaluation of crypto in general last year, I don't know if you've seen any on tax returns of people taking capital losses from crypto or capital gains, or if there's a number that we know state tax returns that people are actually recording that information on.
No, that would have been very nice to help with this audit. Unfortunately, when we were trying to peel that out from the AGI or the FTI, the crypto gains weren't separate in a way that we could actually isolate that. The only information that we had, I think maybe a year or two ago, the feds it was just a yes or no question on the return to just say, did you have a cryptocurrency transaction of some kind, just to get, I think, a general, almost kind of like a survey, just to get a general sense. But that was the only information that we could gather.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this presentation today. I watched, I think, a month or two ago when you made a presentation, the post audit as well, and read the report. My question, though, it's not necessarily about crypto. Was this the first and only post audit that had to deal with crypto? Has there been a post audit request in the past for, I guess, further blockchain technology and how we could incorporate that into state government to find efficiencies?
Not to my knowledge, certainly not one that I can think of that was approved. If that is something that the committee or anybody would have interest in. I can give you my card afterwards, and I'd be happy to work with you on a proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make sure that I understand this. So is the concept that people are going to have to pay taxes on capital gains in cash, but they can't pay it in cryptocurrency, whether or not they have cashed in or not?
So I think that when you would pay capital gains on cryptocurrency, again, if you're treating it as it, so if you were to sell, let's say you bought one token of whatever cryptocurrency it was that, Bitcoin, whatever it is that you would buy.
So you bought one Bitcoin for $20,000 at some point during the year, and at the end of the year, it's allegedly worth $25,000.
And you were to trade that or sell it through an exchange, you would.
What if you don't trade it or sell it?
Then there's no transaction.
There's no capital gains.
No capital gains on that. It would have to be, you could maintain it in, it's called a digital wallet. You could maintain it in a private digital wallet or through a broker. And if it just sat there, no taxes, something would have to be traded for it to be taxed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe this is like talking about a video game to me, but if I'm just wondering when we can start deducting losses from Boardwalk and Park Place. But if the people who've lost millions of dollars in cryptocurrency, can that be counted as a capital loss against your gains?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'll say this: when we presented this to the Post Audit Committee in July, I believe the Department of Revenue was present, and the idea of risk and loss came up during that as well, because it is unregulated. There is a lot of risk for folks to invest in this, and it's a very popular investment as well. So I think part of what they were talking about then as well was kind of education, as just trying to get the word out there that, do what you'd like, but there is risk associated with this. Whether or not you could claim it as a loss, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think the more accurate answer to that question is do not pass go and do not collect $200. Representative Haswood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions, if I may. One is, does any of these other state legislation that's been passed impact crypto trading?
So I think you're referring to figure 1 there on page 8 on the other states that we looked at.
Yeah, on page 8.
On page 8. Yeah, so we looked to see what are other states doing. What we found was that there were 43 bills introduced in 22 states since 2015. Of those 44, only 2 were enacted as of March of 22. So there was lots of introductions, very little got passed, and the general sense we got from that is it's another reason why there aren't a lot of best practices out there right now for taxing cryptocurrency. It's evolving, it's moving quickly. By the time it seems like something gets put on paper, crypto's shifting in a way that you have to pivot again. So I think people are kind of playing catch up right now. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but.
Thank you. And my second question, I guess, of those 2 bills that are passed are in your research. Is this legislation equipped for the evolving changing of different types of currency? So it's not only just Bitcoin, but sometimes billionaires will create their own dog coin, and I don't know what else is going to be forthcoming.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, these bills apply to any type of digital currency. So it wouldn't just be specific to Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever. It would be more generic to cryptocurrency in general, which there are a lot of different types of, right? But it should be encompassing of those.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Committee, are there any further questions? Oh, Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to kind of segue off of representative from Lawrence, I just curious on those 2 states, I think it's Wyoming and Nevada. do they have some ability to track those transactions that we don't or that other states don't? I mean, why were they able to move forward with this, or they just wanted to codify that they're going to collect taxes on those transactions when there are capital gains or when they've made money on some type of Bitcoin? Um, I didn't know if your research told you that. I thought it was interesting that there's been so much activity, but only 2 states. And do they have the secret sauce that we can learn from, or what's going on in those 2 states? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look for sure what those two did. I don't believe that it was anything groundbreaking in terms of taxation, and I think in some ways as well, there's actually incentives for using cryptocurrency, is what some of these bills are that are being passed. So it's more along the lines of tax breaks for people who want to use cryptocurrency to try to bring more of that activity into their state. So it's almost going the other way in some. It's trying to loosen regulations when it comes to cryptocurrency transactions and taxation, rather than trying to strengthen them.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might be more for the state treasurer, but do you know if the state of Kansas invests in cryptocurrency, like in the pension fund or anything like that? Or
I do not.
If there's any potential down the road? Just curious if there's any talks maybe we could do between us and them on that front. So,
Not that I'm aware of, but
okay.
perhaps
no worries. It's a long shot, so thank you.
Yep.
That's an interesting question. I think we know a gentleman that might be able to answer that, former colleague. But, any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for your fine work in post audit, and we'll see if we can send some more business your way.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Committee, that concludes the business for the meeting today. Is there anything else that needs to come before the committee? I'll just do another reminder. Please get those confidentiality agreements signed and returned to Leah. And with that, we are adjourned.